the world. Okay. You can tell we will be recording the call today so we can send it out and share it with those who maybe weren't able to make it. Welcome. We'll just give it a minute here as everyone's joining.
It's so great to see all the names and all the faces. If you are willing, I would love to have you take yourself off no video so we can see your faces. It feels really good to see the community and be together that way.
Absolutely. And while we're waiting, we can just go ahead and put where you're calling in from in the chat. It's kind of fun to just see how global our community is. Everyone's calling in from. Welcome. I see a couple more faces popping in. Hello. And we'll get started probably just in about a minute here. As people are joining, we want to make sure everybody is settled and comfortable. It's always just this fun part where everyone's just popping in, saying hello. So welcome. Oh, wow, we've got a lot of places. We've got Austin, Texas. Hello from Jordan, California.
Someone's calling from Rome. That's very close to where I am. I'm in Perugia, Italy right now.
Amazing. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is not too exciting, but welcome, welcome. Okay, as we're getting started here and everybody's joining in and getting comfortable, I do want to go over just a couple of housekeeping things. First, we do ask that unless you're sharing, you kindly stay on mute, just so we can be sure to hear everybody who is speaking. Also, I do want to take a moment to welcome everyone. And by welcoming everyone, I want to welcome all voices, all perspectives, all experiences. At WIA, we are a rich and diverse community from all locations around the world, as you can see here today. And I welcome and respect all backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs. We aim to create a space here today where everyone feels like they're able to share and is included. So please feel comfortable to share your thoughts and your questions. We're going to have some time later for question and answer. So as we're going, be sure to write down your questions so you are ready for that when we get to that point, and always feel free to use the chat. And that it looks like we have a couple more people joining, but I want to hand it over to Athena as we get started.
Thank you so much, Amber, for that beautiful welcome. I love how you set the space of inclusion. That's really important to us at WIA. My name is Athena Katsaros, and I'm the board chair of the Women's Impact Alliance. I know that many of you here today know us already, but just in case you came here through a friend of a friend, I want to just say a special welcome to the new people in the community, and also explain a little bit about what we're all about at WIA. In brief, we are about access to world-class leadership development and coaching for women who are in social impact and environmental action. And so we're all about getting more women's voices to all the decision-making tables around the world, and not just their voices, but their influence and their power. So that's what we're here about. And that's why we are having this conversation today. You are here at our very first Global Ignite session. And what that's about is we're hoping for once a month to have an inspiring woman from different parts of the world, different backgrounds, who are up to good in the world. So this is our first one. And our focus with our amazing guest, who I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute, our amazing guest, Rangina, our focus today, I'm really excited about, because I don't think we talk about it very often, which is the link between educating girls and having women leaders have influence in the world. So that's the conversation we're going to have today. And I want to say just a little bit about it before we jump in. You know, girls' education is not just a basic human right, but it really is a key factor in breaking the cycle of poverty, in promoting gender equality, and also really building strong communities, because when girls are educated, and we know this is not news, but when girls are educated, they're more likely to become leaders. They're more likely to be able to support their families. They become women who are in leadership positions, and those women are more likely to promote policies and practices that it not only advance education for girls and women, but also promote equity, health, peace, justice, and sustainability. And I'm not just saying that because I think that there's so much research behind that when we educate girls and when we get women into powerful positions, the world just gets better. So that's the conversation we're going to have today. And we are so honored to have Rangina Hamidi, who I have known since 2005. Rangina is so many things. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. Once, she is a social impact entrepreneur. She has an incredible social impact business in Kandahar, which is one of the most conservative regions of Afghanistan. And she has women who they're working as a community who create beautiful, one-of-a-kind embroidered pieces. I mean, they are stunning, and they are sold both inside of Afghanistan and exported. So that's one of her many, many aspects of her background. Another is that she was the most recent Minister of Education for Afghanistan, and she held that position literally right up to the moment that the Taliban came to take over Kabul, and even for a couple minutes after that, and she'll tell you about that later. And she is a powerful advocate for girls and women. So I just want to say I'm so thrilled to have Rangina with us. And we have been friends and really mentors to each other for close to 20 years now. So it's just a privilege to get to be in conversation with her. So thank you, Rangina, so much for joining us and being our first honored Global Ignite session speaker, and sharing your experiences, your perspectives, which I know are very, very unique because of your background. So welcome, Rangina.
Well, thank you, Athena. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody, wherever you may be. Thank you for this honor and opportunity to connect with Women Impact Alliance, which is an organization that I love to support and be connected with. So thank you for bringing me on this platform.
Such a pleasure. So I want to start, Rangina, with a personal question, if that's okay with you. I know that when you were growing up, girls were banned from education, but I also know that your family and your father in particular decided to make sure you received an education. So I want to ask you about that and about what difference that right or that ability to be educated has made in your life.
Thank you for asking that question. And that really is the foundation of who I am today. And in fact, when the Taliban invited me to meet with them on August 20th in Kabul, one of the discussion points with the Commission on Education was the idea that had I not been allowed to continue my education or complete my education, I would not have been able to serve in the position that I did. And part of the conversation revolved around the idea of, I hate to say this, but really pleading with the Taliban to allow girls to become educated. And you're right, Afghan children as refugees in the early 1980s, when my family fled Afghanistan after the Russian invasion in 1978, we did not have the luxury of being included in educational opportunities. Luckily, nowadays, refugee communities in Pakistan and in other regions have learned that children's education is an important thing. But in the early 1980s, that was not an action in place. And so my dad, as a refugee man who had to support his wife, his widowed mother, his single sister, and his 5 daughters, of which I'm the 4th, had to make a decision whether, what to do with us. And with the little bit of money that he was making to make us survive as refugees, because he refused to live in a camp for refugees. He wanted to, he always used to say, I have my eyes working, my ears working, my head working, and my body working. Why would I rely on international aid to support me and my family? And I think I've luckily gotten a little bit of that of his attitude in my blood. So he still, in spite of having the burden of financially supporting a large family, he still found time and money to invest in our education, his girls' education, because he knew the importance and value of that. Ultimately, he made the decision to bring us to America in 1988 because the then predecessors of the Taliban, but at that time they were allies of American government, called the Mujahideen. They threatened us and warned us not to go to school as little girls. And if we did not listen to their threat, the consequence was acid on our faces. And they had done that to many of our family friends in the community. And we were living in Quetta, Pakistan at that time. So Dad was an incredible supporter in making the decision and making the opportunity available for us. And he, now that I think about him, he stood strong as a sole supporter in the community where no other family was sending his girls or their girls to schools. And in retrospect, you know, I think it's important to also note that he was a Pashtun man from Kandahar. You know, the current narrative today that we're hearing globally is that all Pashtun men are against their women and against their girls, and they don't want any progress or education for their children or their communities. While unfortunately that narrative is true for some elements of the community that is in power today, this is not the narrative of the Pashtun men historically, or the Pashtun men that was so near and dear to my life. And so I can't think of any other supporter and a feminist in my life than my dad. And I used the opportunity of education all the way up till completing my bachelor's degree to convince and talk to the Taliban when I did, to tell them that just because a woman is educated does not mean that she throws away her religion, her identity, her culture, and her values, because that is the narrative that they continue to press on communities now, saying that an educated girl leaves everything behind and she becomes foreign. And I've been blessed to be able to be in a position where I can communicate that to them and to the world, that education does so much more than just pushing a little girl out of her identity.
Wow, that's such a powerful story, Rangina. And, you know, you bring something up that I do want to underscore, which is this idea that we have of stereotypes where we pigeonhole people, and in this case, men in Afghanistan, and particularly Pashtun men. And I think, as you know, I'll just say, as the board chair of Women's Impact Alliance and as our organization, I think we have to remember that our allies come in many, many forms, and many of them are men. Yes. And I think many of us on the call who are women can recall a man in our lives, whether it was a father or a brother or a husband or a teacher or whoever, who did support us and did help us. And we are very inclusive of that in our organization. And I love that. That's such a beautiful story about your father, Rangina. Thank you for telling that.
Thank you.
So I want to bring in a little bit of the story of your business, which is called Kandahar Treasure. And I know that after September 11th, 2001, or I think you were around 24 years old, you'd completed your bachelor's degree, you were living in the US with your family. You decided to return to Kandahar, which was still quite conservative and quite tumultuous at that time. And you started your impact business there. So I'd love to hear what motivated you to do that. I mean, you really left a very comfortable life in Virginia to go back to your original home and work with women, do a kind of work that would give them more opportunities and more education. And I'd love to hear Why did you do that?
You know, Afghans, even after spending almost 20 years of my life committed to various different things that I did in the 20 years, even till the last day, they would still ask, why have you left America to come and work in this country? So, and even still, you know, there's this desire to want to return, and people look at me saying, people literally clung on planes to get out. Why are you returning? So that question really hasn't left my being as to why I go. And to me, the answer is quite simple. I look back at my country, and although I've been privileged with a dad like I had and a family that I've had and I'm blessed with, and all the opportunities in my life so far. And when I went back and chose to go to Kandahar, because many people were going to Kabul, which was the capital, nobody was going to the provinces in 2000, you know, early 2000s. And I chose to go back to Kandahar, my parents' hometown, because I thought to myself, I said, had my father, had my mother decided not to leave Afghanistan in the, you know, early 80s and give us the opportunities as daughters, as their children, I could, and if I was lucky enough to survive the war, I could very well be one of the women that I'm providing work and support to. I mean, this is really not that far to put yourself in the shoes of people that you're working with. And so for me, it is a simple way to give back to a community that I was and am from. And today we call it pay it forward. So I'm paying it forward. That is the reason why I went, and I continue to have interest to serve back. But also the reason that I started Kandahar Treasure was that immediately, having a women's studies major background, I knew that financial independence was an incredible tool for women, particularly in that part of the world. Women had no education, women had no access to public spaces, but the one thing that they could have easy access to that would not be questioned or stopped by the decision makers in the community was the ability to earn an income. And so I used income generation opportunities as a tool to really empower women in a way where they could then start speaking with the power of money in their hands. And that's literally, you know, the reason why, you know, Kandahar Treasure has succeeded in the way that it has, because when business is good and women are making money and men know that they need the money, and women often will help support them, you know, the family. There's global studies that prove that when women earn, they spend almost all of it back in the community or in their family. Men, it's not as easily, you know, the quotes is not as easy on the men. But one thing that I did realize in the process of working with women from 2003 until 2017, so for almost 14 years nonstop, was that I realized that when business was good and income was coming in high, everything was good. But with business, there's always the risk of markets not being available. And working in a war zone, there was always the struggle of insecurity, you know, Kandahar being the hub of where most of the fighting for 20 years was happening. There were always things changing and coming. And so when business fell, so did our women's opportunities. But when business was good, then the women were on the rise. So I started thinking to myself, what could be something that we can invest in as myself, as women, as the international community, to make it more sustainable for long terms in terms of this notion of empowering women. And there was nothing better than education, because whether business is good or not, whether there's a war or not, whether it's a democratic republic in place or Taliban in place, when a woman is educated, she has asset in her head. And that asset was something that was lacking with the majority of women I was working with. And so I thought that while it's important to earn money, more important than that was to instill the educational liberty and tools, not only in the elder women's minds, but particularly in the younger girls' minds, so that the future generations of this particular network of women could use the power of education to sustain themselves. And I'm blessed and happy to report that today, right now, as we speak, Kandahar Treasure's operation is still ongoing. allowing the, hundreds of artisans, close to 200 artisans, to continue earning income, while the daughters of some of these women who had the blessing of getting even primary education, they're running the office right now. They're running and managing the finances. They're the ones who are communicating with me from across the globe to, produce new designs, to create new products, to meet the deadlines for completing orders. So you see the power of what education is doing, and their mothers and their aunts, the women folk are relying on these younger girls to be able to move them forward in this quest to continue to produce and earn an income.
Yeah, I really am struck by what you said, Rangina, about education as an asset, and how when we are educated, we get to have that. No one can take that away. And it also, gives us more thirst for more education, more learning. And you've really proven that in your business. That's really right there. You're making that link between the power of education and women leaders having influence in their communities. Yeah, thank you for that. Now I want to move to yet another phase of your career where you continue to run your business, but you were also approached to be the principal of a school in Kabul. And I want to hear a little bit about how you developed your philosophy of education, especially the approach to girls' education, and what that philosophy is. Because as a principal of a school, you went from thinking about education for the women in your business, then to actually working with kids. And I think it was boys and girls,
Yes,
right?
it was co-ed.
That's it, boys and girls. But especially I'd love to hear your point of view of girls.
Sure.
So tell us about that phase of your
it's
work.
funny because prior to joining Mizan International School, which by the way was the first official international school registered with the Ministry of Education, and the funny thing is I actually traveled to make that registration happen to the Ministry of Education 3 months nonstop. Little did I know that within a couple of years later, I'd be leading this institution called Ministry of Education. So it's funny how things work in life. But so the idea of education and promoting women's empowerment through education was brewing in my head for many years prior to joining Mizan. But I also had become a mother by then, and my daughter was turning 7 on January 13, 2017. And there was incredible pressure from family and friends who were living in either in the States or abroad, saying, we realize and we understand you've committed your life to working for women in that region, but you're also responsible for your daughter's future. Are you going to sacrifice her future for the sake of serving women in Kandahar? And I could have sent my daughter to school in Kandahar. It's not that there were no schools available, but the quality of education that I looked at and considered was simply not to what a mother of my status would want for her child. And so after talking to my good friend who is basically the idea or the brainchild, Mizan is the brainchild of his idea because he's an educationist, he's a researcher in this field. He challenged me to come and start this international school on the ground because, as he said, he's a thinker, not a doer, and I'm a doer, not necessarily all the time a thinker. And so I think this combination worked greatly, and I took the challenge, knowing that I was not an educationist, but really he and the managing board basically said we need a manager and a leader to lead a vision. You don't necessarily need to understand education, and you're smart enough, you can read books and teach yourself what education is all about. So I took the challenge primarily because of my own daughter. So my daughter was the first student at this international school, and it was a co-ed school, a K-12 model. Of course, we initially invested with the lower grades because we could not recruit students in the upper grades because this was a predominantly English curriculum. And it was hard to find students in the upper grades who would have excelled the language of English to be able to then carry on the work. but the co-ed, 3.5 year experience of running this educational entity, the philosophy that I ran the school with was, first of all, was, the whole curriculum was designed around child-centric, more an environment where the idea was to nourish the children to fall in love with learning, rather than focusing on these strict ideals of grades and competition, and he's number one, she's number two. We didn't have, in fact, the system didn't have grading or ranking up until 6th grade. So from K to 6, kids were kind of basically being assessed through their efforts. And it was either a pass fail, but more in terms of, we didn't really fail our kids. We just realized where the weaknesses were and where the strengths were, and communicated that with parents community. And it was interesting to apply that to an environment where people are so fixated on numbers and competition and who's on top and who's on the bottom. But I think the friendly environment and the environment where kids and teachers and the staff felt so comfortable, almost like a family, a large family, it came to a point where, we had to teach girls proper use of menstruation pads, because girls, as they're growing up, they have to learn how to address this biological need of their bodies. Sure. And even though the scientific classes had this lesson, the teacher did not feel comfortable teaching it in a mixed class. And she didn't feel comfortable teaching it even to girls all alone. So I, as principal of the school, and because I'm a woman, I was blessed with this ask by the teacher, can you please teach our girls about, the usage of pads and what menstruation is. So I got
such a practical thing, I have to say, Rangina. I love that as an example, because it is so practical. And how do you create that safe space for girls? And I'm making an assumption, but I think in the Afghan culture, it might be it's difficult anyway for any girl. And I think it might even be a little bit more difficult, as reflected by the teacher who wasn't comfortable talking about
Absolutely.
it.
And it just shows the cultural dynamics on the ground that was at play, and what I had to manage and maneuver all the time. The need to teach this actually came with a very uncomfortable finding, where girls who were menstruating were actually flushing their pads down toilets, and then toilets would get clogged, and then we would call plumbers to come, and then we recognized that, wow, there's just information that is not being delivered in a way and in a manner that we need to. So, but the interesting thing is, when I took the class of 12 young girls, and I sat them down and I started teaching them very of course, focusing on the biology of what happens to the transformation of our bodies as women, as we make the transition from girls to women, but also being very open and very willing to address the girls' shyness or question or giggles. And the class, Athena, I kid you not, like 1 hour or a little over an hour, went from girls being very shy and giggly about it to them very openly asking questions. So what do you do when this happens? Or what do you do when that happens? And that level of comfort, I think, is a story of how we were making the space of education at Mizan International School available to all kids, not just girls, but boys too. And so I think it was that level of comfort, that level of love and joy for learning, an environment free of violence, an environment where we recognize that children who were having problems and issues at homes would come and bring it to our school environment. And it was the responsibility of the administration and the teachers to address those problems and issues, knowing that we were living in a war zone. I think that made us stood out, which eventually our narrative made it to the president's office, which was a total surprise. So I'll end it with that. But my journey, all I can say is that my journey with Mizan International School was set on the foundation with understanding that today's children are tomorrow's leaders. And if we don't invest in the foundation rightfully today, we then don't have the reason to complain 20, 30 years down the road when those young children have become adults and lead a different lifestyle.
It's so true. It is so true. Well, I think this is a good segue to the bridge that somehow you crossed from being a principal of this international school to becoming the Minister of Education for Afghanistan. And I want to underscore too that you were one of the only women ministers in the Afghan government. So I'd love to hear, first of all, how did that happen? How did you become the Minister of Education? I'm sure it had something to do with the school and your work there being brought to the attention of the president. And I'd also love to hear then, as Minister of Education, what did you learn about just what you're talking about this connection between educating girls and having women in positions of leadership, not just in Afghanistan, but I know your experience there has given you insight into a global point of view about that. So that's a lot of questions in one, but I think you get the idea.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to let everybody in the audience know that I had no plans on becoming a Minister of Education. I had no plans on joining the government ever, contrary to some of the opposing views that still roam around the world thinking education. And the funny thing is, as we were strategizing and planning for Mizan International School's second year, right after we completed our first year, the board and I sat and we were talking about, we got passionate and excited about all the changes that the school was making. And then I joked with the board saying, wouldn't it be wonderful to instill what we're doing here at this school to the whole country as a policy for the entire country of Afghanistan? And then we all just laughed about it. And I think it reminds me of that thing, be careful what you ask for, because you just might get it. And I think it was some angels carried this message over to say that COVID had hit, schools were shut down. I received a call from the president's office asking me to speak to the president. And I was very blunt, saying, about what? And he said, about your school. Okay, so in my head, I thought, because we'd made a quick transition to going from a physical school to a virtual online school with very little resources and training, the whole world was worried about how to continue education. I was really thinking the president only wants us to use our model as inspiration for what can be done with the Ministry of Education. And little did I know that he actually wanted me to join his cabinet. So one of the 4 women at the time that I served in the entire cabinet, and that was the largest number of women we had in leadership position. But the Ministry of Education did not have a female head for more than 30 years when I joined. There were 2 historically before me, but for very short periods of time during the communist era. But my experience at the ministry, even though it was short, but it was the shortest, longest months and period of my life, where I not only learned, and I'm still learning and I'm still analyzing, but I learned that education alone in a society is not enough for women to have. It is crucially important to then utilize that education, utilize the experience and your bodies to be placed in positions of power to bring about the societal change. In a hierarchical society like Afghanistan, where everything is top down, you can do a lot of grassroots activities, but we're not a democratic country like America, where the grassroots was always seen as an important element of the democracy. Afghanistan historical society where everything was coming from top down. So it was important, even more important, to be in a position of authority to bring about change, because then you had the clout to be able to then make the changes. And being in the position of power at the ministry, I learned 3 main things that I want to share. One was that the support mechanisms that women need in any society to be in place of power was simply not there.
And what are those, when you talk about that, because I think this is part of the global application, what are those support mechanisms you think are needed?
I think this is an important one that everybody can relate to, and hopefully it's not a controversial one, although I have many controversial ones too. But the one support, for example, women, regardless of what position they lead, they still are members of a family. And even though I have a loving, supporting husband, and I'm blessed with just one child, and Zara and Abdullah have a beautiful relationship of a father and a daughter, but Zara never wanted to go to bed without seeing mom first. And so coming home from work, even though, you know, I'm running a ministry and it's a lot of work, there were times and days and nights where I had to stay really late. And then I would come home looking at Zara sitting like a little cat in a windowsill waiting for me. And you can imagine the pain as a mother that I would have to go through. And I was reminded by that pain by my bodyguard, who was a man. And he actually would tell me one day in particular, when it was like 11 p.m. and Zara still hadn't gone to bed, and we come home and she's sitting in the windowsill, and he stopped me, my bodyguard, and he said, "Madam Minister, I've been working with men for 11 years as a bodyguard." And he had actually been the same bodyguard for 7 different ministers before me at the same ministry. And he said, "I have never witnessed this moment." So for him to recognize the stark difference of what a woman has to go through compared to a man, much of the politics, much of the decision-making, much of the policies were discussed after hours in men's gatherings, predominantly men's gatherings, as leaders. And as men, they could afford to stay out and party and eat together and discuss issues. As a woman, first, I couldn't do it because of my family, because I knew somebody was waiting for me. And second, culturally speaking, I did not see myself in a predominantly man's gathering being sometimes probably the sole woman, because if I took that step to get close to the decision-making power space, then I was also risking the reputational attack that would come to me saying, "Oh, look, she's hanging out with, foreign men or men that are not related to her." So that was always the balance I had to learn to manage and deal with. Because as a woman leader in that environment, and I think I speak for the global community, even in America, I think women are challenged with some of the same things, but the system has no mechanisms in place to support us in our family obligations and our societal, cultural, social obligations. And there's this assumption that women politicians have to deliver and will deliver just as the same as men. And from my experience, I can just say that that is simply not true. And the world needs to recognize the particular implications that are applied to women leaders than men leaders.
Wow. Well said and well described, Rangina. I think there's so much in what you said, and I know there's so many layers of what it means to create an environment, not just where women are there or have a place or have a role, but where they can actually work that role, where they can bring everything that they want to bring to that, and having the environment that is needed. When you talk about that male setting, I know it's more extreme in Afghanistan, but we still deal with, the old boy network and how do women get in there. I know there's been a lot of talk about that in the tech industry, where I spent a lot of my career, that there's it's the bro network, I guess. It's the more of the young men. And so there are global lessons, I think, from what you're talking about, even if it's in a specific cultural setting. And I feel like we could spend a lot of time on this topic of what does it mean? It's not enough to educate women. It's not even enough to get them to the table. It's how do we get to use our voices, our ideas, our way of being, our way of leading. what is the support that we need to do that? So I'm making a mental note to myself that that could be another really good topic for the.
I actually was thinking that too. But before we
Yeah.
jump to the next topic, Athena, I do want to share that, you know, the other challenge, in addition to not have or not seeing education as just enough by itself, is if we want women in leadership positions globally, we need political backings for them, and not just political backing from men. You know, one issue that we must address, particularly as women, is the lack of support that women in leading positions get from other women.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate reality, but a reality that must be addressed. We cannot keep shoving this under the rug, because it is important to have the support and backing by other women. And finally, in spite of the education, in spite of experience, in spite of the fact that, you know, you feel as a woman all the confidence that you can feel to be able to do what you're tasked to, I, at least in my challenging short career in the ministry, found that I always had to prove more than my predecessors who were men, because the society, the world is just, I'm going to use this world, it's just cruel. We judge women leaders with different standards than we judge men leaders. And so while it's beautiful and it's important to celebrate women in leadership positions, but if we're really trying to create an impact to keep women, not just get them to the leading positions, but keep them there, sustain them in those positions, then we really need to start addressing, why are women leading? I mean, for some of us, we were forced out. We were kind of kicked out because our government fell and the position is no longer there for me to serve. But we have global leaders who are actively resigning from leading positions, and there's a reason for it. Yeah. And I think this alliance is a beautiful place and a beautiful network to start exploring and discussing, why are women leaving leading positions when they know that they can remain. Yeah,
that it's so true. It is a really, it's a powerful question. And I do want to hold that for us for a future conversation. I'm going to ask you, I think, one last question before I talk a little bit more about WIA, and then we go into Q&A where other people will have the opportunity to ask you questions. So we named this, our conversation together today, exploring the undeniable link between girls' education and a future that is more just, peaceful and sustainable. That's the name that we gave our talk. And you've touched on that a little bit already, you know, but I'd love to hear if there's anything else you want to share in terms of your experience or your perspective on this, of this. I like the idea of the undeniable link. It is there between really taking care of girls' minds and hearts and bodies so that they can have the confidence and the ability and the capacity to really grow into amazing women leaders, changing the way we lead. It's not just, I mean, and I do want to kind of underscore that for a moment. It's not just about women leading. It's also about the way we lead, who we are being as we are leading tends to be different than the way men lead. And not to make them wrong, I'm a feminist, absolutely. And I'm a huge proponent of men and women coming together to change the world, to make the world a better place. And what that requires is women being able to bring their full selves in our way of being and leading. So that was a longer explanation than I meant to give, but I'd love to hear
that,
point of view about the girls' education and growing into women. Anything else you want to share with us?
No, I agree with you. And again, I'm a feminist too, and I'm proud of that. And I don't have anything against men, but I do recognize and acknowledge as a woman that we do lead differently. And I never look at that as a weakness. In fact, it's a strength, because we lead with the heart and the mind together. And unfortunately, a lot of the men that I've witnessed, at least in Afghanistan, is that they only lead with mind, maybe a little bit of a mind. But anyway, I'll try not to be too critical. I just want to end with a few remarks on this link that you are talking about. Absolutely. There's, the whole notion of sustainability, of a peaceful and a just future, not just future, but current times too. The 21st century asks for different leaders to address the many layers and circles of challenges that are ahead of us. And while education is a priceless asset any individual can have, I would like to add to education another element that can make education even more powerful, which is utilizing the notion of wisdom. Wisdom attached to or connected with or combined with education, a strong education background, can really move the world. I believe in that. I'm a fan of Bollywood, so I listen to a lot of old Indian music, and the poetry of the songs in the past were much stronger and beautiful than they are today, unfortunately. But the analogy of old Indian songs, there was always this term that they would use: love melts even rocks. Now I'm just translating from Hindi to English, but this idea that nothing melts rocks easily, but that love, that connection, that empathy. And I think leading with the heart speaks to that analogy, that we can, with a different leadership model and a sound educational foundation, utilizing our wisdom in the world, we can change the course of how things are moving in the world as women. That will become and lead to a more just and a peaceful and a sustainable world by being brave and inclusive. I mean, to me, it's that simple. Inclusivity is a common paradigm now, right? And we all talk about it. But somehow when we disconnect with the people that are most opposing to us, I want to ask the audience, are we being inclusive? And that's the challenge that I figured out. And this is where the wisdom comes in, is that the world, unfortunately, has a lot of different kind of people. And so in my country called Afghanistan, there's a group that is named as a terrorist group, but they're in power today. Whether we like them or not, they are leading a 40 million people population country, of which more than 50% of them are women and girls. And the world, even the greatest world leaders, have not found an alternative solution to this issue. But so my challenge to the world, particularly as we address women and girls' education under the Taliban's ban against girls' education for the past 2 years, is that I can either choose to, continue to stand and advocate against what they're doing, which I am. But the wise leader Rangina is telling me, I have no choice but to sit and negotiate and talk and communicate to understand not only their perspective, but help them understand my perspective, so that I can become a better tool in melting the hearts of even people like the Taliban to change their views. And if we allow wisdom the place in our leadership, if we allow empathy the place in our hearts, to sit with people who think completely different, who think completely on different planes, I think women have the power to change the world with that courage, if we just allow that courage to spring from within us. Finally, my personal education journey has taught me that I might disagree with a lot of people on a lot of things, but this world is a pluralistic world. And if I expect others to listen to my ideas and ideals, then I must also at least find the courage to listen to other people's perspectives, even if I don't agree with them. Only then can a true dialogue begin, and a possibility of change of hearts and minds. This is how transformation happens. And when opposing sides come to a middle ground, ideals become sustainable. So with that, I'll end, Athena, and I hope that we have inspired our audience to ask questions and challenge us more with what we've discussed today.
Thank you so much for that, Rangina. I really feel especially touched by the way you talked about bringing wisdom and empathy in as women and our ability to really change the direction of the way the world is going and our particular unique qualities that can do that. I really feel that in my heart. Thank you for that. And I think it's a good transition too. I want to take a moment right now because we are all in the space of the Women's Impact Alliance right now. And we are, as I said before, we're an organization that is all about empowering women in social impact, in environmental impact. And these are the women who are changing the world, who are doing exactly what you're talking about, Rangina. And I'm very proud of what we do at Women's Impact Alliance because it does bring together education and wisdom and empathy and the women's way of leading. And the reason I want to bring that into the space right now is because, as you know from the invitation, we're in the middle of a fundraiser. And so I'm going to take a moment now to invite each of you to help us with this work. And I know we have some donors on the call today already who've already donated to our spring fundraiser. And I want to thank you all for those of you who have done that. And I want to invite the rest of you to really think about if our organization is expressing values that you identify with. And I have the feeling we are because you're on the call with us. And if that's the case, I invite you to match your money up with your values. That's how I think about it when I give. And of course, Women's Impact Alliance is the organization that I give the most donations to. And there are others as well. And the way I think about it is that I give money that expresses where I can express my values. And so I want to invite you to donate. Charlie is going to put the donation link in. Charlie, I think you're going to do that. We're going to make it easy to do. And because we are a grassroots organization, actually every dollar counts. So if you're thinking, oh gosh, I can only give $10 or $25 or $50, whatever it is, that's not only to us, because we raise half of our budget is raised from people like you. And we're able to use that money to give scholarships to women who can't afford our program. We use it to subsidize our program. So I just want to take that moment, invite you to contribute to what I can say with all of my heart is one of the most amazing women's organizations that I've ever encountered. And I've been involved with women's organizations for 25 years now. So I'd really love you to join me. I'm a donor. I'd love you to join me in doing that. So I'm going to close that for now. And what I want to do is get some questions, and Amber's going to explain to us how to do that. And we have a few more minutes to take a couple questions for Rangina. And don't miss out on getting to ask her a question if you have one in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So a great way to do this would be, hopefully we've used this before and it'll go well. You just go down to your reactions button. You'll see that down at the bottom of your screen. Click there and you'll see where it says raise hand right above that. And if you have a question, go ahead and hit raise hand. It'll put you in a queue and we can get to your questions. If you absolutely don't have the bandwidth to come off mute and ask your question, but you have a burning question, please do feel free to put that in chat and we will get to that as soon as we can. So please feel free to raise your hand with your questions.
Jillian is on it. Okay, Jillian, come off mute. We'd love to hear your question.
Wow, thank you so much. And Rangina, what an honor to meet you and hear your story and journey. Just a little bit about myself. I actually am born in Canada, but I grew up in Yemen. Actually was privileged to have an international school, which of course at the time as a youngster didn't really understand the differences of privileges that I had. But fast forward after actually needing to leave because of a war, I embarked on creating a technology company that really focuses on people's movement to be safe as they move any journey wherever they go. But one of my questions to you was, how do you believe we can integrate, I guess, technology and some of the accelerations that we're seeing with AI and the tools that maybe cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin can offer to countries that don't have the same government or policies to help empower people? How do you envision the future, and what advice would you impart on the change makers of today with that? Thank you.
Thank you. Athena, should I go ahead and answer the question now?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. We
So
have a
thank you,
couple of
Jillian.
minutes, so make it a little short
make
because
it
I also
short.
get to Winnie.
Yes. So Jillian, thank you so much. Technology is absolutely a huge opportunity if we want to, use it for good purposes. It does, unfortunately, in environments like Afghanistan, while technology could be a great model of alternative education space for girls who are not allowed to go to school, it does, you touched on it, it is faced with challenges when the country or the administration in power doesn't recognize alternative paths of education to technology. But I'm still hopeful that in 2003, when I first went to Afghanistan and the Nokia phones had just come out, there were no smartphones, and it was a taboo for women to own a Nokia phone, whereas I, as someone who was leading Kandahar Treasure, owned two. Fast forward 2021, every single woman in my network of Kandahar Treasure has a smartphone today, and it's no longer taboo. So technology can bring about changes in societies and social norms much faster than any educational endeavors can. I think it's a challenge for all of us together, but I would love to keep connected to see how we can work together to make opportunities available to women all over the world using technology, because this is the future that we're talking about.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jillian, for that question. And I want to bring Winnie. Winnie, you can take yourself off mute, and we'd love to hear your question for Rangina.
Wow. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the great words of wisdom that you have told us. I feel, wow, what a honor to be here today. My question is basically, how do we deal with the culture and the beliefs and the attitude towards the girls? Maybe if I can say something little about myself, I will put it in a chat. But at the age of 16, 15, I gave birth and I was thrown out of the community. And some organization, some lady somewhere in the city had to pick me up and took me back to school. And I think I was one of 200 kids who, when you get pregnant in our culture, it is you have to be married and the boy has to give a lot of cows, like dowry, bride price. And I'm just wondering, I've come back, yes, I finished school, then I came back to my community to rescue one other girl to school, not to go through what I went through. But there is a lot of culture, a lot of belief, a lot of attitude that girls don't make it, they're just meant for marriage. That girls are not like, even if you tell them, you can sit and be confident and face a man, they're like, no, that is an abomination. You're not supposed to look at a man. A man is a man. How do you think we can get out of it, and I can help another girl, another woman to know that, you know what, you can actually shine your way out. You can be what you want to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Winnie. That is a powerful story, and I salute you for your courage and your leadership and going through what you've been through yourself, but also still continuing to serve other girls. So thank you for your service. My quick sense, because I can totally understand, Afghanistan is an extremely conservative and a patriarchal traditional society. And yes, as you said, there's a lot of taboos. There's a lot of issues that we hold against girls when we don't against boys. all I can say is that the more we make and normalize stories like you and others who've been through extreme situations and make it part of the society at large, part of the conversation, the more the society is going to begin to understand that how many more Winnies are we going to create by kicking them out of the society, because that is not the solution. And education is a great platform to do that with or within. But there's so many other entities and places and spaces that can, contribute to that narration. And in my particular region of Afghanistan, I think it's much more powerful if men start to engage actively in these conversations than women, because men are listening to men more than us women. But I'm sure this may or may not be the case in other places in the world. But it goes back to Athena's point of how important it is to have a variety of different allies. Yes, it's important to have women supporting women, but we do need men supporting our cause just as much, and sometimes even more. So thank you again for your service and your commitment.
Yes, thank you, Winnie. And I'm gonna sort of reluctantly bring us to a close here, because I feel like we could all stay on a lot longer. And I want to say first, thank you for everyone for coming and for joining us for our very first Global Ignite session. We have another one coming up in June, on June 8th. So look for that. It's on LinkedIn, Instagram, and be sure to sign up for that. So thank you for coming, for being part of our community. I love just having this feeling of getting to have really honest conversations together. And Rangina, my friend, my mentor, my colleague, and so many things. Thank you for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you. And I am really so touched to get to share you with this community. So thank you for your wisdom, for your service, for just who you are.
Thank you. So lovely to talk to you. And I hope to remain in touch with people. So anybody who wants to find me, get a hold of Athena. She'll be sure to put you in touch with me. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Rangina. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
Feel free to
Thank
come
you
up.
so much.
Bye. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oops. Okay, team, I'm going to walk across the hallway now and we'll debrief. So I'm going to keep you on as I walk over across the street. Thanks, everybody.